on the 20th, he promised that he was going to pass a bunch of presidential actions. And so one of the actions that he promised was this restoring freedom of speech and ending federal censorship. What he was responding to is this growing censorship and speech codes that have really sort of been pushed onto society or pulled onto society. I'm not really sure if it's pushed or pulled, but generally supported by people on the left, and especially the far left. Like in this class, for example, there are a lot of things that I can't talk about today that I could have talked about 20 years ago. Things I can say, I'm not certain what to say. I'm really careful about what the things I say in this class, far more than I ever was 20 years ago. And that's largely owing to the left and the censorship and so on that has just been pushed, the speech codes. Like what, man, I have been attacked from the right, but I've really been attacked from the left. And the left is what scares me more, because that's like the cancel stuff, you know what I mean? So the right wing just wanted to get me fired, which, okay, I can deal with that. But the left wanted to get me canceled. And damn, man. Recently, last week or so, word came out. There's this growing list of words that are being scrubbed from government websites and various documents. What they're trying to do is remove as many references to DEI, and then it extends into climate change, and it extends into vaccines, and a lot of other what are considered to be dangerous topics or problematic topics. So, ironically, one way to deal with the censorship of the left is to come up with these words that we're going to scrub from the lexicon, at least as regards the federal government. And so they're not banned words per se, okay? They're not banned. It's like you can't use them. But I don't know when scrubbing something becomes banned. So, for example, I have a lot of colleagues who, they're applying for grants and, the NIH and NSF, and, you got to put your grant proposals through the federal government, and then, people start looking for the key words. And there are a lot of key words that are on this list, a lot of words that are on this list that if that's on there, it gets flagged. It's going to get flagged, and there's no official procedures that are taking place right now, that are in place. But, everyone's really aware that people in my world and people in a lot of worlds are quite aware that you don't want to be flashing these words around, because it could lead to your research not being funded, and one thing after another, right? So, but what is happening is a lot of on government websites and various documents, a lot of the words on this list are getting redacted or getting scrubbed, getting deleted. What we're going to do is we're going to have a Q&A today. And the Q&A is you're just going to ask me questions. Anything. I realize that, I come in here and we do, we have a class plan and we do a class like we did last time. But today's a Q&A. And this guy right here has the microphone, and he's just going to run around the room and give you the microphone, and you're going to ask me a question. And I might ask you a question in return, but the point is it's a Q&A. It's an open conversation. And every time one of us uses one of the words on the list, here's the list. The team up here is going to flash these so we know that that's a banned word. Okay? So we're going to have a little fun. So your job, we have two teams here. We have Team America, which is called Team Freedom. And over here, Team Freedom. Yeah. And here we have Team Censorship, because we have Dela from Iran, we have Muhammad from Saudi Arabia, and we have Percy from China. So they know censorship really, really well. And they understand banned words really, really well. So what's going to happen is whichever team can most quickly raise this, when you hear one of the bang words, Gerald down here is keeping track of the points, okay? And the winner gets prizes, all right? The reason I want to talk about this is because, if we go to the next slide, this very class, race, ethnicity, culture, it may not even exist next year, right? Because, wait, is it just race or ethnicity? They're all on the list. Oh. All right. Well, for me, this is particularly, this hits close to home because this could be the last time this class ever gets taught as race, ethnicity, and culture. It would be, I can talk about Social 19, but I can't talk about, race.
How do you feel about President Trump wanting to retake the Panama Canal?
It seems as though if we're trying to cut costs in this country, claiming land that's as complicated as the Panama Canal is not what you really want to do, right? So, and on top of that, it really lowers our status, I think, in the world if we do that.
You told us that you lived in Colombia. I was just wondering what you thought about American support to President Petro. Do you find it surprising? People in Colombia don't necessarily agree with Petro, and he has been very controversial.
Yeah.
But here in the U.S., there's a surprising amount of acceptance. Do you find that
Well, there was certainly among with Biden, but I think Trump is he hasn't said really much at all about Colombia, has he?
I think he sent some illegal immigrants back, and Petro did not want to accept them. So people were approving of him because he was defending.
Yeah. I can imagine Trump not being so very supportive of Petro. Petro is the president of Colombia, who is pretty far left. Yeah, very far left. The problem is the ideology of Petro and the ideology of Trump are just completely separate.
Isn't there a difference between government-sponsored speech and just free speech in general?
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah. I would think so.
With the whole thing.
And the issue is, that's why I say, these aren't banned words per se. What it is the government is saying, hey, listen, we went too far in the world of DE&I, and they're just trying to pull back the reins. I don't really have a problem with that. As you remember the classes we did on DE&I, that I feel like we've went too far, and as I would say, it's kind of the left, especially the far left, they overplayed their hands on it, okay? And so there are these simple words, man, that you can't say. This is a bit of a problem. So, yeah. So there is a fundamental difference here. When we come up with words that we're scrubbing from ordinary words, right, like race, ethnicity, culture, that we identify as at risk, that's a problem, man. Yeah, that's a huge problem for me.
I know that immigration is a pretty big cultural issue in the country. Do you think people's perspectives on illegal immigration could change once they start observing changes in the labor market, changes in kind of how our economy runs?
Yeah, I think because when we see the changes, first off, if you really understand what immigrants bring and you understand what happens when we lose all of the labor of immigrants, I think people are going to really rethink a lot of things. Yeah. But at the same time, I also understand the sense that people have the feeling that immigration or illegal immigration or undocumented immigration, whatever is out of control. But I also would like to say the following. For 2 years, during my master's and the beginning of my PhD work, I studied immigration, illegal immigration, pretty extensively. And there were an estimated 10 to 11 million undocumented people here in the United States. Okay? Today, the estimate is 10 to 11 million, maybe 12 million. It hasn't changed. And so there is a way in which what has changed is that people are more aware of the issue. And then as people are more aware of the issue, we think, and then we have images coming in from the border and so on. Well, those images, we could have had them 40 years ago. But so it seems like it's far more out of control. That's the first thing. The second thing is immigration has turned into more of a social justice issue.
How do you feel that people on visas and green cards and student visas are getting deported by ICE and just disappear?
It's a slippery slope. So the person who's, we say it's supporting the terrorists, then becomes the victim. Then that person becomes the victim, and then we don't have any way to really understand what to do with that person. And then what happens is our system is most at risk.
I've heard a lot about American reputation and status amongst the international community. But yeah, I've heard a lot about American reputation and status amongst the international community.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, to what degree would you weight the opinions of other countries and perhaps world citizens against the interests of Americans?
That's a good question. Other countries are going to be biased in some way, right? But hey, can I just say this to the Americans, first off? As someone who has traveled all over the world and spoken with people from all over the political spectrum, rich people, poor people, people who love the U.S., people who hate the U.S., people who whatever. People aren't jealous of us, okay? Let me be really clear about that. But people do have opinions about this country. We can't make our decisions based on what the opinions of other people are. And we have to be really, those of you on the left who are really critical of the U.S. or really critical of Donald Trump or whatever, don't just listen. Find people in other places who are critical and think like, oh, look, they hate us or they whatever. It's like, you don't listen to them. Like, whatever. No, it's about, you got to do what you need to do as a nation. So our president, just like Biden before him, and before Biden it was Trump, and before Trump it was Obama, the president and the administration, they're always going to do what they think is best for a nation, okay? And that's their job. They're elected to do that. They're not elected to look out for other countries. They're elected to look out for this country. And that's what the Trump administration is doing, just like the Biden administration is doing. So, that's the job. The fact that these words are out, right? And there are these lists that are going around. Is that kind of strange to you?
Absolutely. I've family members. I have people that I'm close with who work in the federal government who've talked to me about this. So just a question. What does it help by banning such words as advocacy, BIPOC, Black, Latinx, DEI, culturally responsive definition, evidence-based, science-based, injustice, increased diversity, NCI budget? Like how does that help, right? Like how does vulnerable, how does women and underrepresented, how do all those banned words help? I totally agree. In terms of like the banned words in the federal government, absolutely, but those banned words don't affect us here in the streets. We can still say those words without somebody coming and putting cuffs on me. I totally agree that it's wrong, and I fear that it's going to affect the science community in the future. That's what I care about.
Well, here, let me give you this though. So one of the things that we run into here is that Penn State as an institution gets a lot of federal funding. Okay?
Absolutely.
So when you run, it's a slippery slope to say like, okay, first off, I'm not saying the words are banned. The words are not banned. The words are being scrubbed from certain documents and websites and so on and so forth, right? So when we look at like measles,
H5N1, that's another one. Bird flu, that's also banned.
Bird flu, there's one. So, but that's going to get scrubbed in a certain context, okay? So it's not going to get scrubbed like, someone can be walking down the halls of Congress and say like, talk about the bird flu.
Right.
And they're not going to get shuffled away or something. That's not what it is. And so I want to be really clear that that's not what's happening here, and that's not what I'm saying is happening. What we're talking about is when you start putting lists together of average, ordinary, everyday words like prejudice,
Yeah.
then you're just on a slippery slope, man, to go like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So for the vast majority of people in the past 2 months or 3 months, right, we're now starting to go on 3 months, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. I mean, the vast majority of Americans, 4 years from now, for the vast majority of Americans, nothing will have changed. Probably. There are a lot of people, especially on the far left, who are like, oh my God, this is like Nazi Germany coming at us. I'm like, no, just relax. Hang on, relax. Like, it's not. It's just, my job is to be the person in the middle, right? My job is to be the person in the middle. Many countries around the world, such as Peru, there are voter ID laws. Why do some Americans find requiring IDs to vote racist or prejudicial? Yeah, I mean, because here, in order to be registered to vote, you have to be a citizen. You have to show proof of citizenship. And then you're registered to vote. And once again, we have historically seen that there's very, very low levels of fraud. And so it's never been much of an issue here to require voting IDs and so on, right? But the racist thing and the prejudice thing is because we know that poor people are much less likely to have access to IDs and have IDs than people with means and people with money. And so basically all of these kinds of laws and policies or procedures we put in place create some kind of bias against certain groups of people, okay? And they're discriminatory. People argue. For me, I have the idea that it's very strange to have a system in place where people are elected on the basis of votes by individuals, in that my vote, like a person who really thinks and thinks and thinks, is equal to the vote of somebody who has absolutely no idea about anything at all. And that my vote is just the same. It's a really strange thing, man. It's a very, very strange thing. So, Ed from Peru, like, I find that to be really odd. I don't know how else to do it, but I find it to be very odd. All right. But anyway, that's where the racist or prejudice thing comes from.
So you gave a TED talk about empathy, and last class you talked a lot about like misconceptions in the military.
Yeah.
So what's your stance on the enhanced interrogations and its methods, and how like a lot of innocent civilians being tortured, especially during the 9/11?
Well,
and like how a lot of them call the military inhuman. So what's your stance on that?
So here's the thing. The research on enhanced interrogation, which is also known as torture, the research on that shows that the vast majority of the time, it doesn't work. It doesn't get the things you want. Now, we think that it would. You think that if you torture somebody, you're going to eventually get them to talk. But the research, and this includes research coming from people who are part of it, right, will say that you're not getting what you need to get. So you got to find some other way to do it, okay? Even though it seems like it would. And oftentimes it's just rooted in wanting to just lash out at people, right? We feel we've been done some kind of wrong, and so we want to lash out at somebody else. And that's the motivation behind a lot of stuff. And you want to be careful. And what I find, what's really interesting, it's like, so Mark, the lieutenant colonel, who was on the screen, when I talk to people at those levels in the military, they are, like my TED Talk, for example, on Iraq that you all watched, I heard Lower level military people, I would get emails going like, oh, you're anti-American and like all this kind of stuff. But the higher level, I got emails from higher level people. I got invited to give that talk in front of military folks because they said I need my people to understand this. I need my cadets and recruits and so on to understand this. So
how come the one thing that unites the far left and far right is how much they hate Jewish people?
It's not the one thing that unites the far left and the far right. Okay, the one thing that unite. It's not, and it doesn't unite the far left and the far right. Okay.
I think when it comes down to hatred, it's really the individual. It's really the individual more than like what political party they associate with. I come from a family with both sides of the political spectrum, and they don't hate. They are Jewish, so they don't hate Jewish people. I think right now, like with everything on the media, I can understand how you can get that viewpoint, but I just don't think that's very realistic.
So the hate speech part, there is some, and yeah.
I just wanted to ask if you think birthright citizenship is something that could ever be tampered with.
Yeah, definitely, it's going to be. There aren't a lot. Birthright citizenship is the idea that if you're born in a country, you're automatically a citizen of that country. Okay, which part is really, for us, it's part of the Constitution. So it's like built in, it's just been that way. But it's been that way in the United States because the people who came here across the ocean and are born here, we're not going back. They weren't going anywhere. And this nation was building citizenships as much as possible. Citizens, right? We needed to raise the level of the citizenry, the numbers of people. So it made sense to have birthright citizenship, right? You're born here, you get that. But then, there are people that come here who are A, undocumented, B, they have a lot of money, so they fly here and they have a child and their child has U.S. citizenship and then they go back home. And I mean, this kind of stuff. It's not the only way to do it. And so it is going to be being seriously questioned, but understand that it would mean you change the Constitution. So that's really, really important. And other countries have birthright citizenship. We're not the only one. So I hear Americans talking about, why are we doing that? Well, half the countries in the world, as far as I know, have that. So
when you hear something from an opposing point of view, for example, like the censorship topic, like when you group together the censorship topic all together, it's like, it sounds so silly. Words like diverse being banned.
No, again, not banned. Remember,
not banned, but
not banned.
Censored.
Yeah, censored in some kind of way. You have to be careful about how and where you use them. That's what's going on here.
Right.
Which I don't inherently, I'm like, the problem with this, it's a slippery slope, man. You start going down this slope and like, whoa. But Americans we're pretty hardcore, man. We're not going to let this thing go on very far. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
But just with topics like, just for example, that one, do you think that is difficult to understand why somebody might be doing something like that? Can you not understand why it is that he's doing some of the things that he's doing?
Yeah,
or
definitely.
Do you understand why he is doing those things and you just don't agree with the motivation?
A good friend of mine said it in the following way. He said, Sam, there are times when you just have to change the clothing that you're wearing. Just change the jacket. And just put yourself in a different space. See the world in a different way. And try to understand something that you really have an incredibly difficult time understanding. I think it's very difficult for human beings to do that because we put ourselves in some space where the world is complicated, and we finally get ourselves to a place where we think we can understand a little bit of it, especially you all at the age that you all are at. You're just trying to hang on to the little crumbs of understanding. And then someone comes along and just pulls the rug out from under you. And you just got here, man. I'm on this square right here. I just got here. So I got to start pushing away other ideas because it makes me more solid in the space where I'm standing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a great way of answering that.
Yeah, so then I got to just keep saying no. Go, you're wrong and you're wrong and you're wrong, so that I can just feel like I'm right about something. Man, I don't something. And so right now I can just think Trump, they're all idiots or whatever. It's well, I don't know, man. Look at some things that are going on and actually step over onto this square and say why, tariffs from this square, tariffs seem like a really bad idea. Like a really, really bad idea, a dumb idea. But there are people who are really smart that are saying no, this is really good. So then you got to come over to this square and you got to be, all right, put a different jacket on and try to figure it out. Just talk to someone, read somebody who's saying no, this is really good. And don't just make fun of. Because when we parody other, especially where we all, look, it's true for me. Because I don't parody anybody. I don't make fun of anybody. Because I'm constantly finding out what a knucklehead I am. I have no right to make fun of anybody. Or think anyone's a complete idiot or wrong or whatever. I just don't at all.
I had a question, and it's specifically on kind of how you mentioned that liberals might be kind of overreacting to what the Trump administration has done, and also our conversations about whether or not Trump has restored justices or taken them away.
Yeah.
I specifically wanted you to talk about how the cutbacks of the Department of Education might impact us long term, because personally, I know family who's worked there. I personally worked there and was recently fired, but even I'm just an intern and I got fired, but people with actual families who've been working there for years and had important jobs have gotten fired too, and it's been around 50% or so the staff are preparing to be fired. So I was wondering if you can talk about that.
So here, let me just say this. I saw that today that that Kennedy is saying in his department, his area, they're going to lay off 20,000 people. I'm 20,000 people, man. That's 20,000 lives, y'all. You know what I mean? And so I think that these things, we understand the disruptions actually hurt individual people. And to make these very quick, very rash decisions really fast, I will just say from my personal point of view, in my own humble opinion, it's never a good idea to make really fast, really quick decisions. You're generally speaking going to just create as many problems as you think you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, I agree. I feel also in this class, we talk a lot about DEI and different political parties, but sometimes with the right, when they hear things like DEI and stuff like that, they kind of it's always seems like a propaganda tactic. We don't actually see the harms that the Trump administration has done. Some things kind of go undercover. And I feel one of those is the Department of Education. There's not been a lot of critiques on that.
You could say, but I think it's true of every administration. You know what I mean? I mean, it's there's a lot of different harms. Kate, nice job, y'all. Who won, by the way? So the Americans won? Dude, Team America. All right.